Welcome to Puzzle Proof. Join us as we unravel today's captivating story and solve exciting puzzles together. Get ready to engage your mind. Let the journey start. Chapter 1. The Grim Discovery. It was on a damp and colourless autumn morning that the fateful missive arrived at 221B Baker Street, forever altering the day's course for Mr. Sherlock Holmes and me, Dr. John Watson. I recall the London fog drifting about the lampposts in thick swirls as I stepped into our sitting room, only to find Holmes already poring over a short, hastily scribbled note. The envelope bore smeared ink, suggesting it had been written in haste or under great distress. In the flickering glow of our fireplace, I could read a few of its stark words. Tragedy in Lower Hemlock. 2 sisters, found lifeless, require immediate assistance. The signature below was that of Constable Brewer, an officer unknown to us at the time, though evidently in dire need of Holmes's singular expertise. Holmes, setting the note aside, let out a low whistle of dismay. "Watson," he said without looking up, "we appear to have been summoned to a sleepy village that is anything but peaceful at present. We must depart at once." His eyes betrayed that particular sharp gleam of intellect, awakened fully by the promise of unravelling a fresh mystery. I inquired at once about the contents of the note. "It is most disquieting," Holmes remarked, gesturing for me to read. 2 young black girls, sisters, have been found near an ancient well, quite dead. The circumstances remain uncertain, but the constable believes foul play. He fears the local community is in uproar, quite understandably. My heart grew heavy with the knowledge that 2 lives, so precious and full of promise, had been so abruptly cut short. Yet I was also resolved to aid Holmes in any capacity, for if there was any chance of uncovering truth or securing justice, it lay in the clarity of Sherlock Holmes's formidable deductions. Within the hour, we were bundled into a hansom cab, navigating through London's bustling streets before reaching the quieter fringes that opened on to the countryside. The transition was a familiar one to me, London's sooty hues giving way to the greens and browns of rural roads. But on that morning, an inexplicable heaviness seemed to hang in the air, as though nature itself had sensed a tragedy unfolding. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent, likely sifting through the meagre details provided in the note and considering what dreadful scene might await us. The journey to Lower Hemlock was not a short one, and as our hired carriage bumped along winding lanes, I attempted to glean more from Holmes about what we might expect. "This mention of an ancient well intrigues me," I ventured. "Could the site itself hold some significance? An old superstition, perhaps, or a local legend that might have cast a sinister shadow upon the place?" Holmes only nodded thoughtfully, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Human wrongdoing can take root in any soil, Watson, urban or rural, ordinary or extraordinary. Yet often these small villages harbour old resentments, hidden feuds, or quiet prejudices that can prove as lethal as any city crime. We shall see." At last, our carriage rattled into Lower Hemlock, a village of stone cottages with ivy climbing the walls, and modest shops clustered near a single, winding high street. The sun was already slipping behind a gathering bank of grey clouds, lending a sombre cast to the scene. Despite the quaint exterior, there was a palpable tension in the air. Residents peered from windows or stood in doorways, hushed in their sorrow and alarm. News travels quickly in such places, and the death of 2 local sisters was, without question, a devastating blow. Constable Brewer, a man of medium height with a lined and anxious face, greeted us by the village green. He removed his cap in a gesture of respect, then wasted no time in guiding us to the site of the tragedy. Holmes offered him a brief handshake, along with a word of condolence. I trust the scene has not been unduly disturbed, Constable. We shall need every trace of evidence we can find. Brewer assured him that the local residents, though distressed, had stayed back as much as possible once they realized it was a crime scene. We followed Brewer to the outskirts, where a lone, ancient stone well stood by a narrow meadow. Rusted with time and covered in moss, the well had evidently once been an important water source for the village. Now it loomed as a bleak monument to this shocking event. The grass around it was flattened and muddied, bearing the marks of recent commotion. Footprints in several sizes, the faint traces of what looked like scuffling, and the footprints of the unfortunate souls who had discovered the bodies. Brewer, his voice trembling slightly, revealed the victims' names, Esther and Clara Jones, aged 12 and 14 respectively. Daughters of a local tradesman, they had been widely known for their kindness and bright demeanor. Their lifeless forms had been found at dawn, prompting a wave of terror through the village. "I've had them taken to our small chapel, sir," Brewer explained, his eyes lowered in reverence. "But if you've any questions about their final moments, you might glean something from the ground here. We did our best not to trample over much." Holmes stood motionless beside the well for a moment. I caught the flicker of sadness in his expression, an unspoken lament for two young lives ended so cruelly. Then his gaze hardened, and he methodically began to study the terrain. The breeze carried a faint, damp chill, stirring strands of his dark hair. I, too, took in the impressions in the soil. The scattered footprints, the disturbed earth near the rim of the well. There were fragments of broken pottery, likely an abandoned water jug, as well as a rag torn from a garment. Every detail seemed tinged with heartbreak. "It is a grim affair indeed," Holmes murmured, his voice low. "But we shall do all within our power to unmask who or what has wrought this horror upon the Jones sisters. Come, Watson, let us note every minutiae. The simplest clue may prove vital in the end." And so in that silent meadow by the ancient well, our investigation commenced. The mild autumn air felt stifling, weighted by the knowledge that somewhere, among these peaceful cottages and hedgerows, a malevolent hand had acted with unspeakable cruelty. My heart pounded with the realization that the path before us would be fraught with sorrow and suspicion. Yet, in the presence of Sherlock Holmes, the pursuit of truth pressed onward, promising that no secret would remain buried for long. Chapter 2. Echoes of Suspicion. At first light, a low fog clung to the meadows of Lower Hemlock, shrouding the ancient well and surrounding fields in a pall of grey. The tragedy of the previous day weighed upon every doorstep, and one could feel the hush of collective mourning in the damp autumn air. As Sherlock Holmes and I emerged from our modest lodgings at the local baker's loft, Constable Brewer was already waiting by the narrow lane, his hat in his hands and an anxious crease upon his brow. It was evident he had not slept. "Mr. Holmes," he said quietly, "the villagers are clamoring for answers. Young Esther and Clara's father has taken ill with grief. He remains in the chapel, unwilling or unable to leave his daughter's side. The local doctor has done what he can, but there is little to be done for a man's broken heart." Holmes offered a measured nod, his gaze distant yet keenly focused. I had seen that expression before, the intense look of a mind busy cataloguing possibilities, discarding impossibilities, and quietly identifying each subtle thread that might lead us closer to the truth. "Constable," said Holmes, "we must speak with anyone who might shed light on these dreadful circumstances. Start with those who last saw the sisters alive, then, if you would, direct me to whomever discovered their bodies. Though we have inspected the well, second-hand accounts can reveal angles we have yet to consider." At Holmes's request, Brewer walked us to a small cottage near the green, where a kindly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Randolph, awaited our questions. They had been among the first on the scene, having ventured out early in search of stray sheep. Their eyes shone with sorrow as they described that harrowing morning. A glimpse of bright cloth in the grass, the dreadful realization of what lay near the old stones, and their immediate summons to the constable. Mrs. Randolph dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They were such good girls, always polite when fetching water, greeting us with smiles. I cannot fathom who would do such a thing. Husband gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. No signs of a struggle were obvious. Their pail was broken, but that might have happened if it fell. I heard not a shout, nor a cry. Her the evening prior. We were indoors by the hearth. If only... He trailed off, voice thick with regret, plainly wishing he had heard or seen something that might have saved the sisters. Holmes listened with a stillness that was almost unnerving. His questions probed small details. Whether the family dog barked that evening, if any visitors had come to their cottage, whether there had been unusual lights or figures moving at dusk. The Randolphs answered each query earnestly, but little new information arose. Yet I knew each response was being quietly filed away in Holmes's mind, to be retrieved at the precise moment some fact would spark recognition. Leaving the Randolphs' home, we continued along the main lane. The villagers we passed kept their voices hushed, some politely bowing their heads in acknowledgement of our presence, others averting their eyes as though fearful of voicing anything that might invite suspicion upon themselves. Grief mingled with anxiety, a potent reminder that in the aftermath of tragedy, even the most innocent can feel inexplicably guilty. We made for the chapel next, a humble stone building wreathed by ivy. Inside, the faint glow of a single oil lamp revealed neat rows of wooden pews. At the far end, near the modest altar, two small caskets rested side by side. Mr. Samuel Jones, the girl's father, knelt nearby, back bent as though the weight of his sorrow would crush him. The local vicar stood at a respectful distance, a comforting hand on the grieving man's shoulder. Holmes paused just within the doorway, the expression on his face reflecting both compassion and resolve. Though his composure was legendary, it was impossible not to be moved by such a raw scene of loss. Carefully, he stepped forward, introducing himself in a voice so soft I scarcely heard it. Mr. Jones lifted his head, tears glistening upon his cheeks. I do not know how this happened, the father whispered, voice trembling. My daughters, they were good girls. If only I had walked with them. If only I had... His words caught in his throat, the final syllables consumed by silent anguish. Holmes placed a gentle hand upon Mr. Jones's shoulder. Please accept my sincerest condolences. Dr. Watson and I have come to seek justice for Esther and Clara. If there is anything, no matter how small, you recall about that day, it may help us prevent such evil from befalling another family. After a quiet moment, Mr. Jones revealed that his daughters had left the house shortly before dusk. The well's water level sometimes dropped in autumn, and they liked to finish chores swiftly so they could return to the warmth of home. Neither father nor daughters had reported any quarrels or threats. No new faces had been seen lingering near their cottage. Then, voice trembling, he spoke of subtle unease. For weeks he'd felt something was amiss in the village, cold stares from a few neighbours, an undercurrent of disapproval he could not quite name. Holmes listened intently, his gaze fixed not on the father's tears, but on the spaces in Mr. Jones's account where incomplete facts or hidden truths might lurk. I thank you, he murmured at last, stepping back to afford the grieving man some distance. No detail is too small. Dr. Watson and I will do all in our power to unravel this dark puzzle. We left the chapel in solemn silence, hearts weighed by the sorrow etched upon Mr. Jones's face. Outside, a faint breeze stirred fallen leaves along the chapel path, the rustling noise the only sound in a world rendered quiet by tragedy. As we stood there, I sensed that Holmes had already begun forming a chain of logic from the scattered clues, each piece awaiting its place. Whether these leads would converge swiftly or take us through a labyrinth of suspicion, I could not say. Yet in that overcast morning it was plain that the village's grief would soon mingle with dread, and that the question of who had committed this heinous act would haunt every doorstep until the dreadful truth came to light. Chapter 3. Threads of Unease. The gloom of early evening settled over Lower Hemlock as Holmes and I prepared to continue our inquiries, determined to uncover any overlooked facts surrounding the tragedy. A light drizzle had begun by the time we left the chapel, sheathing every surface in a thin, glistening coat that made the village's modest lanes especially treacherous underfoot. A suggestion by Constable Brewer led us first toward a narrow thoroughfare lined with slate-roofed cottages, where we hoped to speak with more of the residents who might have observed any unusual events. Our initial stop was a modest dwelling occupied by the Grant family, a middle-aged couple known locally for their skill in preserving fruits and vegetables which they sold at the weekly market. Though obviously shaken by the dark atmosphere gripping the village, Mrs. Grant kindly invited us inside, offering chairs near the hearth. With quiet composure, Holmes asked if she had heard or seen anything amiss in recent weeks that might hint at tensions involving the Jones sisters. Mrs. Grant's reply hinted at the pervasive anxiety many villagers felt. "Folks here keep their words guarded, sir," she said, lowering her voice. "I've witnessed some ill-natured remarks directed at outsiders now and then, and with the well so far out near the fields, it would be easy for trouble to strike unseen." She twisted her apron in fretful hands, reluctant to provide names. "I can't say who exactly, only that some folk aren't as welcoming as they pretend." Before we could press further, Mr. Grant, standing near a tall shelf of pickled jars, interjected in a subdued tone. "A handful of our neighbors resent newcomers, especially families they consider different." He exhaled slowly, as though releasing something he had kept inside for too long. Could that resentment have escalated into violence? I pray not. Throughout the conversation, Holmes's gaze swept the room, taking in every small detail. A worn spot on the rug, a barometer near the window, and various scuff marks beneath the table. He seemed less interested in the immediate scene than in how the Grants spoke. Their voices, tinged with uncertainty, hinted at a larger undercurrent of tension in the community. Once we concluded our visit, Holmes and I stepped back out onto the rain-soaked lane. The drizzle had intensified, and the watery lamplight gave the street an eerie cast. "It seems we are not imagining the atmosphere of distrust," Holmes murmured as we walked. "Yet we still lack direct evidence. We must dig deeper into who might bear any real grudge." No sooner had he spoken than a voice called from across the way. A small framed man in a patched coat beckoned to us from beneath a wooden awning. His face was pale, and his expression carried a note of urgency. "Begging your pardon, sirs," he said, "but I couldn't help overhearing your questions in there. I'd no wish to interrupt, but if it's the Jones matter you're investigating, you might want to speak to Mr. Kilgore at the orchard. He's had words with folk over that well before." Thanking him for the suggestion, Holmes and I headed for the orchard at the village's edge. The few apple trees still clinging to their fruit stood stark under the grey sky, their branches rattling in the increasing wind. In the distance, a faint light glimmered through the windows of a squat farmhouse, As we approached, a tall, broad-shouldered figure emerged, a man with silver-threaded hair and a worn face. He introduced himself as Ernest Kilgore, caretaker of the orchard and tenant on the farmland. When informed of our purpose, Kilgore's reaction was guarded. "Not sure what I can tell you," he said, crossing his arms. "Tragedy that's befallen Mr. Jones's girls, to be sure. But if you're wondering about disputes, I've none with the man. My quarrel's more about land rights for building. There's talk of expansion near that well. Nothing to do with harming children." Holmes regarded him calmly. "You say talk of expansion. Might that include efforts to purchase land or secure access to water sources?" Kilgore's jaw tightened momentarily before he spoke again. "I've heard rumors of farmland being surveyed. Some see that well as part of a potential plan, but you'll find plenty who think it's all just gossip. That's all I know." Though his words were measured, something in his demeanor suggested he was uneasy. Holmes asked a few more precise questions about whether Kilgore had seen or heard anything unusual near the well around dusk, about who might have reason to wander there unobserved. Kilgore grew progressively terse, responding only with shrugs. We left with no direct accusations, but a growing sense of unspoken frictions at play. The orchard's lonely setting, coupled with Kilgore's cryptic manner, nudged our suspicions in new directions. When we regained the lane, the wind had increased, rattling shutters and driving the rain into icy rivulets down our collars. Holmes glanced once more toward Kilgore's farmhouse, where the solitary light still glowed. "All these hints of unsettled tempers, Watson," he said, "will require careful sorting. Greed, prejudice, or a twisted combination of both may lurk in this quiet realm. Let us keep sifting every rumor, every half-truth. Only then can we untangle the final facts." And so we returned, sodden and pensive, to compile our findings. Though progress felt incremental, I sensed that each layer of this disquieting puzzle nudged us nearer to confronting whatever darkness had stolen away two innocent lives. Their father's sorrow remained foremost in my mind, urging me on to help Holmes unravel each clue, no matter how subtle or concealed. Chapter 4. Unfolding Tensions. Morning broke with a muted glow that did little to dispel the weight of uncertainty hanging over Lower Hemlock. The unpaved lanes still bore the prints of cartwheels from the evening's deliveries, and a faint chill clung to the air as the skies threatened another downpour. Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, left the baker's loft determined to unearth fresh leads. We had uncovered hints of discord, both personal and economic, yet no tangible proof as to who had so mercilessly cut short the lives of Esther and Clara Jones. A soft mist drifted across the village green as we made our way to a cramped constable's station tucked near a row of poplar trees. Inside, Constable Brewer sat hunched over a desk strewn with statements gathered from weary villagers. He looked up from a half-finished pot of tea and pushed the documents toward us, shaking his head. "I've tried piecing together a timeline," Brewer said, tapping a few scribbled notes. "Everyone insists they saw or heard little of consequence. One or two mention unusual footsteps near the meadow, but no one can agree on the hour." He lowered his voice, betraying a hint of exasperation. "Some folks here are too afraid to speak plainly. They sense the tension simmering under the surface." Holmes skimmed each page at an impressive speed, occasionally pausing to absorb a particular comment. "Thank you, Constable," he said, placing a careful finger on one line of text. This remark about a strange lantern glow at dusk intrigues me. Another villager mentions a muffled cry they attributed to a fox. Perhaps these observations align. Before Brewer could respond, a sharp rap sounded on the station door. A wiry man in a threadbare coat stepped inside and introduced himself as Duncan Wilkes, a labourer from the outlying farms. He looked from Holmes to me with evident unease. "I hear you're trying to help Mr. Jones," he said quietly. I might have something to share, though I'm not sure if it's important." Holmes gestured for the fellow to proceed. Wilkes took a nervous step closer and began explaining that he'd been returning from a neighbouring village the night the sisters vanished. As he passed near the old meadow, he glimpsed two figures standing by the well. One seemed to be a child, the other distinctly taller. He had assumed it was a parent tending to some late chore. "But then," Wilkes added, "I heard what I thought was a cry or a gasp, very brief. I hastened my pace and told myself it must be my imagination. Only the next morning did I learn what happened." Upon hearing this, Holmes's expression remained impassive, yet I recognized the sharpened focus in his eyes. He probed further, asking about the silhouette's clothing, stance, and direction of movement. Wilkes wrung his hands, insisting he could only make out vague shapes in the fading light. Still, Holmes took down every detail, thanking the labourer for coming forward. We emerged from the station with hearts heavy but minds resolute. Each account, however meagre, added another piece to the jigsaw. Beneath the fragile calm of Lower Hemlock, it seemed multiple tensions converged upon that lonely well. Holmes proposed a return to the meadow, this time to conduct a more thorough inspection of the adjoining terrain, hedgerows, footpaths, and any hidden depressions in the earth that might have provided concealment for a lurking presence. The sky, meanwhile, darkened ominously. Rain began to fall in sparse, cold droplets as we retraced our steps beyond the village perimeter. Thick brambles flanked the winding trail leading to the meadow, their thorny vines snagging at our coats. We paused near a collapsed boundary fence, where Holmes crouched low and brushed away wet leaves. In the mud, partially obscured by fallen branches, he uncovered a faint impression of what might be a boot heel. "Look at the depth, Watson," he murmured, "and the angle. Someone came through here, likely at a hurried pace. I'd hazard it's no more than a day or two old." With precise movements, he used a small folding rule to measure the indentation. Then he carefully cleared away more debris to reveal a second mark, smaller but similarly oriented. The drizzle intensified, forcing us to work swiftly. Though the prints offered no immediate identity, they did suggest flight or pursuit. Continuing around the perimeter, we reached a weathered wooden stile. Holmes took note of fresh scratches on the top rail. "Someone climbed in haste," he observed. "If we link these marks to the time frame of the murders, we may be edging closer to understanding a possible route of escape." Drawn onward by that possibility, we proceeded toward a distant copse of slender birch trees. The understory was carpeted with moss and damp grass, creating near-silent footing. Every so often, Holmes paused to scan the ground or examine low branches for evidence of snagged fabric. Though we found no additional footprints, the hush of the place felt thick with unanswered questions. As the rain grew heavier, we took shelter beneath the overarching boughs. There, Holmes removed a small magnifier from his pocket and studied a fragment of cloth caught in a jagged branch. The color was indeterminate in the dim light, but it bore a thread pattern that might match coarse, everyday apparel. Slipping it into an envelope for later examination, he regarded the landscape with a solemn expression. "The village believes it has told us all it knows, Watson," he said quietly. "But the land itself may speak volumes if we only learn to listen. This place, so tranquil at a glance, is carrying secrets that haunt the night." With the downpour now drenching our coats, we finally turned back toward Lower Hemlock, our minds alive with fresh clues that might, if followed with precision, lead us further along the path toward truth. Chapter 5. A narrowing path. A faint glow pierced the overcast sky as Sherlock Holmes and I set out once more, compelled by the unanswered questions swirling around Lower Hemlock. Traces of the previous day's drizzle still clung to the village lanes, forming shallow puddles that reflected the weary faces of those who passed. Though our minds brimmed with leads, some factual, others mere rumor, it felt as though every new piece of information led us deeper into a thicket of uncertainties. Our first call that morning was upon a local blacksmith, Mr. Abernathy, whose workshop stood near an ancient oak at the edge of the main road. The clang of metal on metal echoed through the crisp air as we approached, a methodical rhythm that faltered when he glimpsed us at the threshold. Wiping his brow, he set aside his hammer and gave a curt nod, evidently aware of our purpose. "We don't get visitors like you often," he said, voice tinged with both curiosity and wariness, though I suppose these are no ordinary circumstances. Holmes, in his customary direct manner, made polite inquiries about any developments the blacksmith might have noticed during his late hours at the forge. Mr. Abernathy said he usually worked until well after dark, the glow of his fire guiding travellers who lost their way on the lane. When asked if he recalled anyone hurrying by on the fateful night, he hesitated. "I heard footsteps," he admitted, light enough that I assumed they belonged to a child or perhaps a slight figure. It was well after sundown, maybe near midnight. Could have been an insomniac or someone returning from the tavern. I can't say I saw faces. Holmes pressed for further detail. The blacksmith eyed him carefully, then added, "There might have been more than one person now that I think on it. Footsteps overlapping." I only heard them for a moment, and then they faded into silence. Though the admission was vague, it lent weight to the notion that multiple individuals might have traversed that path. Holmes thanked the blacksmith, and we departed, leaving the gentle rattle of chains behind us. Once outside, my companion paused in the lane, his brow furrowed. "We are confronted by a puzzle with many fragments," he observed. "Footsteps here, a lantern, glow there, uncertain sightings at various hours. All must be woven into a single fabric if we are to uncover the truth." We next turned our attention to a cluster of cottages east of the village green, where we found a row of workers' dwellings abutting the fields. Only a handful of residents were in, most having left for labour elsewhere, so we called on one occupant, a seamstress named Miss Cowan. Her humble parlour smelled faintly of lavender. Once she realised we were investigating matters related to the recent tragedy, her anxiety was apparent. "I do recall hearing something peculiar that evening," Miss Cowan said in a trembling voice. "A kind of yelp, as if someone had stumbled, or worse, but I convinced myself it was an animal near the hedgerows. I'd no reason to imagine anything truly dreadful." Holmes asked whether she had glimpsed any figures crossing the adjacent paddock. She shook her head, wringing her hands. "It was quite dark. My window faces only the lane, but the cry, if that is what it was, lingered in my thoughts. I felt uneasy all night." Her recollection, like so many others, remained inconclusive, yet a consistent thread emerged: fleeting movement, hushed noises in the late hours, and a shared sense of foreboding. Holmes's expression grew pensive as we took our leave. A hush lingered over that row of cottages, as though the walls themselves withheld vital secrets. On our way back toward the village centre, a wan sun peeked through shifting clouds, illuminating the spire of the small chapel in which the grieving father had so often been found. We did not enter the sanctuary this time. Holmes felt it best to let the man remain in peace until there was something more concrete to offer. Instead, we stepped aside onto a narrow footpath that curved behind a row of overgrown gardens, hoping to find vantage points that might explain the mysterious movements so many residents had described. Through a sagging gate at the end of the footpath, we came upon a neglected yard. Brambles bordered the fence, their twisted vines snagging Holmes's coat as he leaned forward to inspect a patch of flattened grass. A stray cat darted away, disturbed by our presence. I remained silent while Holmes made a close examination of the ground. Though he spoke not a word, I saw his eyes flick over each bent blade as though scanning an unknown language. At last, he straightened and met my gaze. "This place likely served as a concealed route," he said quietly. "A clandestine crossing perhaps used by someone wishing to avoid prying eyes." No footprints were immediately clear, but the mere suggestion of a concealed path lent credence to the mounting theory that certain parties had traversed the village outskirts under the cover of darkness. It was yet another subtle signpost directing us along a twisting course. As the afternoon waned, we made our way toward the green once more, uncertain of what revelations the remaining hours might bring. Though the day's investigations raised questions faster than they provided answers, Holmes walked with unwavering determination. Somewhere behind shuttered windows and fearful whispers lay the key to solving this most sorrowful puzzle, and in time we would surely find it. Chapter 6. Deepening Shadows. Despite the persistent chill in the autumn air, an undercurrent of apprehension lent the village of Lower Hemlock a certain feverish energy. Footfalls on the lanes seemed louder, doors slammed shut more hastily, and windows were kept curtained at all hours, as though the villagers feared the very daylight might expose hidden treacheries. Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, rose early once again, determined to probe whatever fresh angles had surfaced overnight. We began by reviewing the notes and impressions gathered in recent days, spreading them out on the baker's small dining table where we had taken temporary lodging. Each scrap of testimony, snatches of conversation, accounts of footsteps heard, or odd glimpses by lantern light, mingled with the physical evidence, faint boot marks, partial cloth fibers, and subtle signs of forced entry in neglected corners. Holmes quietly tapped a fingertip on each key point, as if testing the solidity of a mosaic. "This affair grows more labyrinthine by the hour, Watson," he mused, eyes narrowing. "Fear, prejudice, and perhaps envy all swirl together in Lower Hemlock, yet none alone suffices to explain the killings of those two innocent sisters. We must find the single thread that draws every contradiction into alignment." From there, we set off to revisit the parish records. For a village of modest size, Lower Hemlock boasted a surprisingly robust archive, housed in a converted stable near the chapel. A wizened clerk named Mr. Tillings managed these documents. He wore spectacles precariously balanced on the tip of his nose and greeted Holmes with a faint bow, evidently recognizing my friend's reputation from old newspaper accounts. Holmes politely explained that we wished to confirm certain land transactions and family lineages. Though we had once heard rumors linking the old well to local property claims, we possessed no concrete proof connecting that potential dispute to the sisters' murder. Mr. Tillings, clearly anxious to help if it meant resolving the village's dread, rummaged through a series of tattered ledgers. Eventually, he laid out 3 parchment-bound volumes, each listing births, deaths, and property deeds. With measured patience, Holmes combed through each entry. From time to time, he would point to a surname or date, prompting the clerk to fetch a matching document. I saw glimmers of curiosity in Holmes's expression when he stumbled on references to farmland boundaries shifting over decades. Yet there was no smoking gun, no single scrap stood out as the reason behind the murders. Still, he methodically copied whatever he deemed potentially relevant. Upon emerging from the stables, we discovered a dour drizzle had begun, dripping steadily from the eaves. The light was flat and lifeless, as though the sky itself had grown weary of the village's despair. Constable Brewer appeared, drenched and breathing hard from a brisk walk across the green. He had news of an alarming incident, a rough scuffle in one of the back lanes, where a local farmhand had been found nursing bruises. "He refuses to name who assaulted him," Brewer explained, removing his cap to shake off the raindrops. "He claims it's unrelated to the Jones sisters, but given the climate, I suspect fear is keeping him silent. Perhaps the man saw or overheard something he shouldn't have." Holmes lifted an eyebrow. "If a man conceals knowledge, it may be self-preservation. I shall speak with him if he's willing." We accompanied the constable to a cramped room above the village cooper's workshop, where the injured farmhand lay on a makeshift pallet. His left eye was swollen shut, and the stench of vinegar and bandages hung heavily in the dim space. Although he appeared uncomfortable at first, Holmes's calm, measured tone coaxed him into sharing what little he claimed to know. "I was out late by the orchard," the man murmured, wincing at the movement of his jaw. "Heard voices raised, though I couldn't pick out words. Then someone caught sight of me. Next thing I knew, fists were flying." He insisted he had witnessed no faces clearly, and that he only half heard something about keeping quiet. When Holmes asked, "Which orchard?" the farmhand hesitated. "The orchard, by the old boundary fence," he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "The one that leads on to Mr. Kilgore's stretch, near that far footpath." Though the revelation was minor, a thoughtful light flickered in Holmes's eyes. We thanked the man for his cooperation and departed, leaving him to rest. Once outdoors, the constable gave Holmes a questioning glance, as though hoping for immediate revelations. Holmes merely shook his head. "I cannot yet see the entire shape," he said, "but we now have renewed reason to scrutinize that orchard boundary, and any who lurk there." Before returning to our own lodging, Holmes and I tramped once more through the sodden lanes to speak with a few reticent villagers. Most offered polite rebuffs, reluctant to risk further involvement in such a grim affair. The gloom of the day weighed heavily, as if daring us to unlock its secrets. Even so, a current of expectation ran beneath every exchange, and I sensed that we were edging ever closer to some critical discovery. That night, as I settled down to transcribe our progress, Holmes stood at the window, gazing into the murk. "We are on a narrowing path," he said quietly, "though we cannot yet glimpse the destination. One false step, Watson, and we may stumble in the dark. But if we persevere, I trust that truth will, in time, break through." Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. A sullen hush greeted Sherlock Holmes and me the next morning as we ventured out to continue our inquiry. The sky brooded with dense clouds, and though the air carried the scent of impending rain, the downpour itself remained at bay. All around, villagers moved about briskly, their furtive glances betraying a sense of collective unease. Yet despite the tension, a subtle shift was occurring. Those who had seemed hesitant to confide in us mere days before now watched us with cautious hope, as if anticipating that the veil of secrecy might soon be lifted. Our first call took us to a modest house set off from the main road by a narrow strip of garden. There, we spoke with a young mother named Harriet Green, who had come forward the previous night with the claim of hearing muffled arguments from the direction of the orchard. Her two small children hovered in a back room, wide-eyed but silent. "I'm not one for trouble," Mrs. Green whispered, wringing her hands. "But I cannot shake the thought that someone in this village, someone we pass in the lanes each day, knows precisely what befell those poor girls. Twice now I've heard strange shouts near the orchard fence after dark." Holmes gave a gentle nod, pen poised over his notebook. "Did you see anyone? Perhaps a lantern, or the shape of a figure moving beyond the hedge?" She shook her head. "Just voices raised in anger, quickly hushed. It left me on edge. My windows face the orchard path, and though the view is blocked by trees, the sounds carry at night." Holmes thanked her and promised discretion. Outside, in the lane, he paused to reflect. "We have repeated hints that nocturnal meetings occur near those boundary fences. Always half heard, half seen. That, Watson, suggests a deliberate effort at secrecy." An hour later, we found ourselves back by the orchard footpath, where dew clung to the long grass in glistening beads. The caretaker, Mr. Kilgore, was nowhere to be seen, though signs of recent activity were evident. A shallow wheelbarrow track, fresh scuffs on a wooden stile, and clusters of disturbed soil. Holmes examined the tracks with scrupulous care. I half expected him to brandish his magnifying lens then and there, but he simply pressed his fingertips to the damp earth, gauging its texture. He stood, lips pressed tight. Someone has carted heavy objects across this path recently, judging by the consistency of the indentations. Yet the orchard yields only modest harvests at this time of year. One must question what truly prompted these comings and goings. Before we could investigate further, a stir at the far edge of the field drew our attention. A slight figure in a tattered coat strode quickly between the rows of trees. We recognized him, the taciturn man who had once offered cryptic hints about feuds near the well. Catching sight of us, he hesitated, appearing torn between fleeing and confronting us. Eventually he beckoned, eyes darting left and right as though to ensure no eavesdroppers loomed among the branches. Once we drew close, the man's voice trembled with urgency. "I can't tarry, or they'll spot me. You want to know who's been skulking about after dark? Follow the orchard fence deeper beyond the gate, near the old boundary stone, but watch yourselves, there's more than one party involved." He said nothing more, retreating so swiftly that Holmes had no chance to press him for details. Yet his warning lingered like a chill wind, hinting at multiple actors weaving a tapestry of collusion or rivalry. On impulse, Holmes proposed we wait until dusk to observe the orchard discreetly, hoping to catch any covert rendezvous in progress. That evening found us huddled behind a ramshackle shed, hidden among the orchard's outermost trees. A pale moon rose through a haze of cloud, casting flickers of light across the damp grass. Time passed slowly, punctuated only by the distant hooting of an owl. Just when I began to suspect the vigil would yield nothing, faint footsteps rustled amid the leaves. Two silhouettes emerged, meeting near a low stone that jutted from the earth. Their voices, hushed yet intense, drifted on the night air. Holmes motioned for silence. We could not discern every word, but the tension in their exchange was unmistakable. Then one figure drew what appeared to be a lantern from beneath a cloak, illuminating a face half concealed by a brimmed hat. At that instant, the second individual, smaller in stature, raised a hand in alarm, pointing in our direction. We froze, hearts pounding. Whether they saw us or merely sensed an intrusion, we could not be certain. In an instant, the light vanished, and the two silhouettes bolted, vanishing into the orchard's deeper recesses. Rising from our hiding place, we gave chase, yet the darkness conspired against us. Twisting through rows of fruit trees in the moonlit haze, we caught only the faint echo of running footsteps. Despite our best efforts, our quarry eluded us. Eventually, winded and muddied, we paused to regroup by the orchard gate. "That was no coincidence," Holmes muttered, attempting to steady his breathing. "Some clandestine bargain, perhaps some scheme well beyond the petty boundaries of this village. This is further evidence that the sisters' fate might be entangled in deeper intrigues than we first supposed." With that, we retraced our steps to the track. Though the night's confrontation had raised more questions than it answered, it confirmed one crucial fact. A conspiracy of secrecy was indeed alive in Lower Hemlock, and the orchard served as its shadowy stage. The path ahead remained perilous, yet the flicker of truth had grown brighter, beckoning us forward through the dark. Chapter 8. Revelation and Resolution. A subdued hush filled the parish hall, broken only by the shifting feet of those assembled. At Sherlock Holmes's request, a diverse gathering of villagers had convened. Constable Brewer, Mr. Samuel Jones, still mourning the loss of his two daughters, Miss Cowan the seamstress, the blacksmith, Mr. Abernathy, orchard caretaker, Mr. Kilgore, and various others who had crossed our path during the investigation. Thunder rumbled outside, punctuating the tense atmosphere that had settled over Lower Hemlock. Holmes stood at the front of the hall, posture composed, sharp grey eyes surveying the room. I, Dr. John Watson, lingered nearby, prepared to offer any assistance he might require. Everyone present understood we had come to a decisive turning point. For weeks the village had been haunted by the brutal killings of Esther and Clara Jones, and at last there was a sense that the truth might be dragged into the light. Clearing his throat, Holmes began in a measured tone, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering." The The tragedy that befell these innocent sisters has cast a dark cloud over your community. Over the past days, Dr. Watson and I have spoken to many of you, collecting testimony, observing subtle patterns and unearthing hidden motives. Now we must bring together these scattered pieces to name those responsible. All eyes fell on him with expectant dread. Mr. Jones, pale and trembling, clutched the back of a chair for support. Nearby, Constable Brewer watched intently, a mix of relief and apprehension flickering across his features. Holmes nodded briefly in Mr. Jones's direction. We know that Esther and Clara had no enemies of their own making. Their deaths emerged from a deeper conflict, one that touches upon the orchard, the ancient well, and the simmering tensions in Lower Hemlock. Through multiple clues, we discovered that nocturnal gatherings occurred near the boundary fence of Mr. Kilgore's orchard. Several villagers heard raised voices in that area, and some encountered hushed threats or found themselves assaulted for venturing too close. At this, a ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd. Mr. Kilgore, arms folded, shifted on his feet but held his silence, expression guarded. Holmes turned next to the blacksmith. "Mr. Abernathy," he said, "you spoke of hearing footsteps late at night. Light footsteps overlapping with heavier ones, correct?" The blacksmith stiffened and gave a curt nod. "I believe those footsteps belonged to two individuals engaged in a secret pact. One whose smaller frame allowed them to move softly, and another heavier accomplice. They met by the well under the cover of darkness." Casting his gaze across the assembled faces, Holmes continued, "Early in our investigation, we encountered uncertain rumors of farmland expansions. Certain plots of land, including the orchard, stand to gain significant value if developers purchase them for new construction, assuming no complications. The biggest complication, it appears, was the well itself. The Jones family unknowingly held certain rights regarding that water source, which could obstruct or delay the orchard's profitable sale." A stunned hush fell over the parish hall. Mr. Jones opened his mouth to speak, but Holmes raised a placating hand. "We must also consider prejudice. While not every villager has harbored ill will, it is undeniable that some were less welcoming of the Jones family. Combine that sentiment with financial desperation, and you have a powder keg of motive." Holmes nodded at Constable Brewer, who stood ready to intervene if accusations turned violent. Then he singled out Mr. Kilgore. "For days, you were evasive about exactly who visited your orchard at night, yet footprints, scuffle marks, and witness statements suggest you met repeatedly with a second party, one determined to ensure that the Jones sisters' presence never interfered with a lucrative land deal. Indeed, Mr. Kilgore, you were complicit in planning to drive Mr. Jones and his family away, but you did not act alone." Glances darted around the hall until Holmes fixed his gaze on a wiry man standing near the back, the same furtive fellow who had on more than one occasion slipped away from us. "Mr. Hodge," Holmes announced, "you served as the other half of this dark equation. While Mr. Kilgore stood to profit from selling orchard land, you provided the strong arm and, I must assume, the cruelty to carry out the threat. On that fateful evening, you both confronted Esther and Clara, intending only to frighten them into avoiding the well. Events escalated when the older girl recognized you and you feared she would inform her father. In a panicked attempt to silence them, you committed an unthinkable act." A shocked gasp rose from the assembled. Mr. Kilgore sputtered denials, but Mr. Hodge's face went ashen. He glanced frantically toward the exit, only to find Constable Brewer stepping forward with handcuffs at the ready. "You cannot prove," Hodge began, but Holmes cut him off gently. "We have ample testimony of your secret meetings," he explained. "We discovered traces of your footprints leading away from the orchard, matching the measurements taken near the well. The farmhand you assaulted overheard enough of your conversation to confirm your involvement, and Mr. Kilgore's reluctance to fully explain his nightly movements further implicates him. The land records verify that he stood to gain from removing any claims associated with the well." In the charged silence that followed, Brewer took the two men into custody. Shock and relief mingled among the crowd. Tears welled in Mr. Jones's eyes as he grasped Holmes's hand. "It cannot bring my girls back," he said brokenly, "but at least we know who did this." "Thank you." Holmes bowed his head in a gesture of quiet sympathy. "Their memory demands truth," he said simply. As the storm outside finally unleashed its torrential rain upon the roofs of Lower Hemlock, the parish hall rang with the sounds of closure, however painful, taking its first steps. In time, the village would mend, haunted still by the tragedy but freed from the suffocating shadows of suspicion. And as we departed with the dawn, I marveled yet again at how the unerring logic of Sherlock Holmes had brought justice to an out-of-the-way hamlet, rendering the once impenetrable darkness a shade less forbidding.